Hello, this is Bryan Caplan, and today I am interviewing my collaborator, Zach Weinersmith, and then he's going to interview me. So the two of us wrote the New York Times bestseller, Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. I wrote almost all of it. He drew everything, but the division of labor is actually a bit more complicated. Maybe we'll get into that. But now I just want to start off with my interview of Zach, and then we'll switch over to his interview of me. All right, so I'm going to start with backstory. All right, I've met your parents, Zach, and they tell me that you've been drawing as long as they can remember. At what age did your drawings start looking like the Weinersmith drawings that we all know and love?
I think probably in college. I did the usual when I was a teenager, just duplicating comic book stuff, which is actually a really bad habit. Because you like, especially if you like. So I was born in 1982 when and this is probably still true. I guess I don't know, but when the average comic character was like not just muscular but like repulsively muscular, like had like giant monster veins and like muscles that don't exist. So I have this really bad habit to this day of drawing people with enormous triceps.
Which was Iron Age, right? Yeah, you grew up in the Iron Age of comics, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. Weird time for comics. And I actually know lots of cartoonists have some version of that. Like they grew up on manga, so everybody has giant eyes or something. They had to untrain themselves. But yeah, probably sometime in college I got more interested in like humor and that sort of stuff, and so I did more simplistic, goofy style.
All right. Well, that brings me into my next two questions. So, when did you become funny, and how hard do you try to be funny in real life? When did you become funny, Zach?
When did I become funny? I was that kid in class. In retrospect, very lucky. I was a kid who, like, by all rights should have been picked on by everyone, but I, for whatever reason, was kind of funny. And like, if you're kind of funny, you can sort of move between social classes, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like in a school setting, because you're kind of I don't know, ambiguous that way. I don't know how to describe it. But so that was to my benefit. And then I didn't think about it as a skill till many years later. So in real life, like most people who write jokes, I guess I'm funny when I feel like it. I don't think about it much. But I don't know if people who just meet me in person would think I'm particularly funny. I'm more of a like, I'll tell you what the problem is. I actually trained in improv for a little while, so I should be really funny off the cuff. But I'm so like, if I have an idea for a joke I think is funny, I'll usually be like, well, I needs to be edited to like maximize the funny instead of just saying it, which is absolute poison for improv or anything like that. So I'm probably not particularly amusing in person. But jokes in books, buy my books, and it's all good.
So who were your favorite humorists growing up?
I have a pretty generic list from when I was a kid, like Bill Watterson, Gary Larson. But in college, actually, there are two comics, and I think one is long gone, and one I assume the author is long dead. I could be wrong. There's one called "The Parking Lot Is Full," which you still see very, very occasionally in like memes, but I think it ended in like 2002. But it's like it was offensive at the time, and it has grown more offensive over time, despite not changing. But it was just like, when you grow up like I did in the 80s and 90s, you were still in the era of the Sunday comics page, which whatever virtues it may have had was very tame. It was very much like had to appeal to the most offendable person, like in Alabama. And so to give an example, actually, I remember. Yeah, and I remember reading. What's his name? Scott Adams, who's gotten a bit weird in the last decade, but I loved Dilbert growing up, and he said he has a character who's like sort of like a fake devil, and the reason is he wanted to have Satan in the comic, and he was told it would be offensive to like Baptists, like that, and that was in the 90s. It's almost unimaginable. So, but Parking Lot is Full was kind of my first experience of a comic that just essentially had no editing, and for better and worse. And so it was at the time quite inspirational. And then there was a British cartoonist named Glenn Baxter, who most people don't like, and I don't particularly love, but he was doing this sort of surrealist, truly, truly weird cartooning. And it was just, these days that's not a big deal because like you have the internet, which is like the land of strange, surreal, confusing humor. But at the time it was really out there. And so I kind of tried to mimic the two of them, and made a lot of bad comics as a result, but sort of learned a lot.
So you're an English major, right, Zach?
Yeah.
Yep. So a lot of people are wondering, how is it that an English major knows so much physics, biology, engineering, economics, psychology, philosophy?
Yeah,
How did an English major learn
well,
so much about everything?
so I will say I'm a bit of a rare English major in that I like English. I think most people get it. Most people get an English degree because it's easy, or because you just kind of fall into it, like you have enough credits, or because you have permissive modern professors who will like let you read like romance novels and write a thesis about it. And I'm probably insulting like exactly one person, but very deeply. But I really like old poetry and books, and like I've just been reading through a bunch of old stuff for a project I think we'll talk about in a little bit. And so
So
I
where does
I
all the
actually
science come from? Where do you get
well
all
so
that?
so what happened, and I'll keep this short, but essentially like I got an English degree and I got accepted to college for English, and I actually wanted to get into comic books as like a field of study, but at the time, way back in 2003, that was really unusual. And so I got the sense I would have to spend 2 years kind of doing the I don't mind drudgery in literature. What I do mind is the kind of like, and here's the theory of what's happening in Act 2, Scene 3 of King Lear, type of stuff, like which I considered by and large to just be gibberish, like kind of signaling noise we make at each other to convince each other we're smart. And so obviously I'm not interested in that. And I wanted to do comics which seemed to be a bit more alive and interesting, and like you could say real stuff about them. And I think I had read Scott McCloud at the time, which is of course an inspiration to everyone who reads it. And it just didn't seem like it was going to fit. So I happened to be at one of the Claremont colleges, at Pitzer colleges, and Hollywood was 60 minutes away. So I moved to Hollywood and had some Hollywood adventures, and decided I hated it. And the last job I had was closed captioning for the hearing impaired. And I just remember kind of sitting there, kind of bored out of my mind, thinking, there's a lot of stuff I don't know, which is kind of embarrassing. Like I was thinking, like, I know there's this thing called DNA, but I don't really know what that means. I can say it, and I know like kids kind of look like their parents, but if I'm being honest, that's all I know about this. And I was like, I really should know. And so I went and bought a textbook, and I was like, wow, science is complicated, but it's really enjoyable. And I just really, really got into it. And then, long story short, ended up going back to college for a degree in physics, and
Okay.
kind of, yeah. So it's. And I don't know if this is something you went into in your education, but there's this weird quirk, which is you can get what's called a post-baccalaureate degree, which the government will generally not subsidize, which to me seems weird, because if you're going to subsidize anything, people going for a second degree are almost certainly motivated people because they're probably paying for it. But it was almost impossible. But the one school in California that would do it was San Jose State. So I moved to San Jose and started on a physics degree. And I got about halfway through it, where for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the physics degree or just dumb luck, but comics started taking off for me, like to the point where I was making like a middle class living, which had been unimaginable not that long ago. And so I just have, but that moment in my life of just spending all my time learning and learning math, which I turned out to enjoy quite a bit, and learning things, just was really a pivot for me. And so ever since, I'm enmeshed in books all the time, and I enjoy myself.
All right. So Zach, you do what you love. You sell the product directly to your fans, and you're still able to support a family. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be their version of you?
Oh man, I would say there are some contingent factors. So I think I happen to get into comics at a good time. The field is much more competitive now. The level of talent, especially in the U.S., has risen to the extent this makes sense. Something like an order of magnitude. Like just people who are 20 today would have been like there are probably 100 people 20 years old who would have been absolute top of the heap in the time I got into it. Like in terms of just raw skill. Whether the writing is better is a harder question. But certainly that's just sort of skill of doing the thing called comics is wildly greater now, and so that helps. But the immodest version, the actual advice I give to cartoonists, I mean, I have lots of like sort of boring advice, like here are the ad services you should sign up for. But the deep advice I give, I think it's deep, is that nobody wants to read anything by someone who's boring. And so by some means you have to unboring yourself. So for me, that's just unborification. Like, so like I am a boring person if you watch me, but what I do is I read a lot of books. So I've read many, like for an audience member, I've read many things they haven't read, many of which are like things that are like technical or obscure or weird. So I'm a person. I've probably read, and this is not me bragging. I hope it's just me giving advice. I've probably read more books in the last 5 years than most people read in their whole lives because it's what I do. But the result of that is I hope that my work is more interesting to a person than they could write themselves. Now, you don't have to do what I did. You could, go climb Mount Everest, or I don't know, like have sexy adventures in Vienna or something. But you got to do something. It's not enough to just think you're clever. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some people who are just that clever and different and special. But I think it really pays to figure out what makes you different. And the real pragmatic part of that, because you'll have teachers in college who are like, find your voice, and you're like, what do you that's a little wishy-washy. But the deep part of it is, if you decide your voice is doing like obvious cat jokes, you will probably have some success for a little while until the next person who can also make obvious cat jokes comes along. So you have to make yourself different, both to have fun and to be sustainable. So that is my least bad advice.
So if the internet didn't exist, what would you be doing with your life?
I have no idea. The internet, like people like me in particular, highly benefit from the internet. Like introverted people who are willing to work. I don't think I could have. I actually know for a fact I long ago, almost 20 years ago now, I did apply to all the major comic syndicates, and they all told me no. So that path would have been blocked for me. I mean, maybe I could have gotten in a zine, but I actually don't know that I was like edgy enough for like the magazine scene. Like for people like me, kind of in between, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity. So I think plausibly I would have ended up just doing the ladder in the film business and sucking it up and just dealing with the awfulness of it, or maybe just bowed out. I have no idea, but probably not comics. I would just guess.
All right. So do you ever revise a comic because you think it's too funny? So is your dream to make people cry tears of laughter every time they visit smbccomics.com, or is there something else going on in your head?
I honestly, I don't think about it that hard, I guess. I just want each comic to be like, the way I think about it, it's not so much about laughs, although I hope I do that. It's like I want each comic to have a chance at being someone's favorite. So it has to be doing something interesting, even if it's just like a little stupid joke, or if it's something like an extended thought about something. I just wanted to have it be a chance to be someone's favorite, something they think about later. But whether we're getting peals of laughter from comics is tough. I think I've done it occasionally, but especially in like a gag format, it's pretty darn hard. Though I actually did have someone write me the other day. I did a joke about someone who goes to a job interview, and they say, what would you bring to this interview? And he says, the lady who's being interviewed said, I would bring Black Claw the Falcon, and who's like, and who's a falcon who can pick off other employees at other companies or something. They said that was a laugh out loud joke. Which by the way is an example of reading obscure books. I actually had the idea for that while reading T.H. White, very famous for The Sword and the Stone, the greatest kids book series ever written, easily, hands down, not even close to anything else. Also wrote a bunch of like weird books. He wrote a book called The Goshawk, Goshawk, I think, which is just about his time trying to do medieval style falconry and just not having it go very well. And I was reading that and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And so I just had this idea for a stupid joke. So yeah.
All right. So what's a scientific concept that you think is really cool, but you haven't been able to make it into a joke, even though you tried? Question from
there are tons, actually. So I learned a lot of these working on Soonish, which was the pop sci book I did with Kelly. We actually have a chapter at the end of this book that's like, here's all the stuff that was too hard to explain in our format. And I think I would have said quantum computing, but Scott Aronson helped me do one. But even then, I don't know if I got like the deep stuff across. Okay, here's a joke. I've actually been working on that. I've been debating doing this, where it's like, so there's this concept in computing of like discovering boundedness, like upper and lower bounds on functions. And I was trying to do like a bad like bondage joke, like trying to find a lower bound on space of motion. And then so I was posting this on Twitter, like, is this funny? And then I inevitably got CS people being like, well, it's not exactly accurate to say you're seeking a lower bound. So the obvious lower bound of motion is 0. Therefore, and I was like, hell. So I'm like, I've got a bad Venn diagram. It's not going to please anyone. So I don't know. I guess I don't know.
Oh, the curse of having mathematically literate readers.
I know it's. I was talking to Phil Plait about this once. Maybe I shouldn't repeat this, but we were talking about like there's a real serious negative to having a nerdy following, which is there's a subcategory of nerds who just cannot let anything go, and we like So for like soonish, we would get people writing like, "I have a correction for you," and you're like, "Oh, damn! Like I screwed something up." And the correction would be something like, "You failed to mention my favorite thing in this technical subject," and you're just like, "Ah,
I don't think you understand what a correction means."
Yeah. We had, I think, we had like one legitimate correction that was like a minor thing, but by and large it was that. And sometimes they're actually mad about it. Actually, I said most nerds are not like this, but some just have a sort of hang up. I don't know. Or we did a thing about nuclear reactors and we got the thorium people. We didn't have too many angry thorium people. But let me not get into this. It's a whole thing. Let's just move on to the next question before I anger the thorium people.
So how much overlap is there between what you do and stand-up comedy?
I would say very little, which is, I say that because my last job in Hollywood was as assistant to talent agents who actually repped a lot of stand-ups, which convinced me I did not want to do stand-up. It is not literally the most miserable job in entertainment, but for me it would have been close. And the reason is, so if most people, they go and watch stand-up and they laugh and that's it. So, but when you're behind the scenes, you see a lot of the nuts and bolts. And one thing that's really, I would say, impressive, but for me, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. Like if you've ever watched, say, Norm Macdonald do stand-up. So Norm Macdonald is a great stand-up comedian.
Yeah, hilarious.
Absolutely hilarious and very smart. And his character he plays, because all stand-up comedians play a character. No one's playing themselves exactly. It's maybe based on them, but it's always a character. His character was basically kind of guy who didn't care about anything, was like telling his own jokes badly, would hesitate and pause and hem and haw. If you ever pick two of his old routines, play them side by side, they will practically duplicate each other, including the stuff where he laughs at how bad his own joke is, or where he sort of pauses and sighs about something, like almost duplicates. Like he had memorized every little motion.
Yeah, all choreographed.
Very, very much so. So there's some stand-up comics who play like I don't know, like Andrew Dice Clay, who plays like I can't believe I'm on this stage and I'm a little bit drunk. Like it's all for show, which is fine. Like that's cool. That's what they're doing. They're basically doing a character. But for me, so then once you know that, you realize what the life of a stand-up comic is, and it is essentially unless you're one of the most successful people, and even then this is still your life. What you do is you go around to comedy clubs around the world. And night after night after night, you tell the exact same 1 hour lineup of jokes. You make minor adjustments maybe for different audiences, or if a joke is just dying out there, you might switch it out. But that's what you do. And an average comedian, and there are exceptions to this, but an average comedian builds up a set over the course of 10 years and just tells those jokes for 10 years.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be miserable. I think a lot of people, they get off on the, people love them, right? They go up on stage, they know the jokes are going to work, so they have a good time. For me, that like the idea of not doing new stuff on a regular basis would just be really crushing. Like I like reading a lot and writing a little, and that's good for me. Whereas a stand-up comic is kind of the opposite. And so I decided it wasn't for me, having been on the back end of it.
Suppose just out of the blue, Netflix offers you a comedy special. Would you take that?
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Netflix.
But on a purely financial basis, I would take that deal. But I would be unhappy about it.
You only have to do the Netflix special once, but presumably you want to practice it a bunch of times first on a bunch of audiences.
I can tell you exactly what would happen is I would spend 6 months doing it and be kind of miserable and collect my big pile of money and put it in retirement and do less work. It's exactly what I would do. It's just not for me. I love books. A book, you put your heart and soul into it, and at the end you have this thing. There's the thing you wanted it to be, and you feel good, and it's out in the world, and you're not having to, go show up all the time to promote yourself. That I like.
Cool. So remember that old college as signaling comic that you did, where there's the line, quote, "The easier college gets, the dumber you look for not having a degree." End quote.
Yes.
So what prompted you to write that particular comic?
So it's funny. I've not been in upper level academia myself. People seem to think I have been, but it's more like I've been in academia as like a student and as someone who had to do research under professors a little bit, and then my wife is an academic, and I just what's funny about like your book on education stuff, like the stuff you say is I really think among academics uncontroversial, except the way you say it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if you talk to an academic and you'd be like, hey, do you think academia has grown like it's gotten to where people are doing less research and less learning and more hoop jumping? They'd be like, oh, absolutely, no doubt about it, and it gets worse every year. But if you say, should we change something, they'll be like, whoa, hey, I don't know about that, and or even worse, and I have sociological theories for this, but like, and this is a literal story. I remember I was talking to someone about this. They were saying like, well, there was this problem. I think I want to say this is NSF did this, but don't quote me on that. That they were like, well, we've discovered scientists are spending too much time on bureaucracy and not enough research, so we need to do something. So what do? They form a committee to determine why we're wasting so much time. And I think to an academic, like everybody recognizes that. That is exactly how you would expect it to go. And so I love academia in the abstract, like this all these like this is how some of my best friends are academics, but. But
almost all of mine.
yes, but what I hate is how the system just crushes the life out of. But just two things: it crushes the life out of good people, and it promotes people who are political animals, who are like good at self-marketing. I actually, to my horror, I was once at an academic conference, and a guy just brazenly, to a room full of students, said, what I did on this paper is I didn't say anything new. I just marketed other people's ideas as a package, and that got me a lot of citations. And I was like, I understand, of course, this goes on, and people have to play games, people have to have careers, but to be like, he was talking about it as if it was the objective goal of a life of learning was to like market oneself. Like Dave Graeber, who I don't actually particularly like as an author, but he said something once. He said the life of an academic now is one of professional self-promotion. Which is a bummer. If you read Tolkien's valedictory speech, I think for the 60s, he's already complaining about how it's beginning to seep in, and it's just gotten worse ever since. So anyway, I'd read a couple of books about this, and I'd also just thought about it myself. And I like once you start pulling on that thread, it becomes really clear. You have this world where I'm willing to believe there are plenty of undergraduates who really care about their subject, do a lot of work, but a lot of them, and everybody knows this, are just spending their time getting a piece of paper and spending way too much money. And I did another comic on this topic that for me bottom lines it, which is I calculated that for the price of a semester in college at a private school, you could pay for 3 adjuncts to teach you all semester long, full time, and a place for them to teach, and a selection of exotic cats. So if you really just cared about the information, then obviously that's what you should do. But of course, as you say, that you've got to have that piece of paper.
Which brings me to my next question. So suppose you had just dropped out of high school to write comics. Would that have actually hurt your career in any way?
Ooh, I doubt it. I will say that the experience I had in college, I am one of the few people I feel like I actually use it. Now, of course, you can readily say you could have gotten that knowledge otherwise. So it's hard for me to just come out and say like, oh, college was not useful because like I actually do use my knowledge of like on the one hand like classical literature and also physics and things. But could I have gotten that knowledge anyway? Probably. Although the one other thing I feel like your theories comport entirely with this is there's some value in the knowledge that because you have this dumb piece of paper, if this comic thing doesn't work out, I'll be okay. I've thought about this. I'd be curious your perspective. Like, I was talking to Kelly about this. Suppose we had a kid. So suppose my daughter, my daughter loves books already. She's 5. She's already like reading and blah blah blah. I can absolutely see her deciding at 18 she wants to be a novelist. And if I didn't worry about signaling at all, I might say, hey, we are prepared to spend X dollars on your college. What if I just gave you the money? I might parcel it out but instead of going to college, go to New York. I know publishers, and just hang out. Just read books, write books, talk to people, and just hang out. And I'm positive, I have no doubt that you will get a better education in your vocation than you would by going to college. But I would be scared out of my mind, I think, at the idea that like, well, what if people don't like your books? Now you're 25 and no degree. I don't know. What would you do if one of your kids had a similar situation?
I guess I would actually talk to people in the business and find out whether it's doable. So there are some where it is. And if I didn't know them, I would really seek them out. But my default is that it's just very hard to get away with these days. But since you mentioned your kids, so at what age do you want your kids to start reading SMBC? And you're not allowed to say you're not allowed to say never, Zach.
Can't say never.
What's the right age for your kids to start reading your comic?
I mean, if I could curate, it would be now. Although they probably would, I'm sure they would hate it. It would just be so boring for them. But I think I don't know, I'm a big believer in the sort of it depends on the kid, but maybe 10 or 12 or something. Can I tell you a story? I can say this publicly because I did it as a comic. It was one of the few times I did like a personal thing that ever actually happened to me. I had one of my books. I was doing a book signing, and a nephew of mine who was probably 11 at the time is reading through my comics, and I'm like, his mom's there. I'm like, you sure this is okay? And she's like, he's already ruined. He's seen TV. And he reads something. He perks up and he goes, Mom, what is sodomize? And I was like, I don't remember what I did. I don't remember what she did. But somehow we got through it. But I was like, okay. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff where I have a feeling of like 12 with guidance, because I'm like, as you know, I'm a guy who likes old books. Old books are often colossally, horrifically racist or sexist or what have you, anti-Semitic. And so there's some books where I'd like, you can read like 19th century lost world books, but I need to talk to you about how Europeans treat Africans, but so you won't go around thinking any of this is okay. So I probably weirdly insulting to myself. I probably have a similar approach to my own comics.
Yeah. All right. So now let's get into our work together.
Yes.
Of course, this is how I know you best. I was a fan before, but in the process of collaborating on this, I feel like I got to know you really well. Usually it was all only email, but still you were a daily presence in my life for about 2 years. So question a lot of people ask. So you initially turned me down when I first proposed the book. So why did you say no, and what made you change your mind?
Yeah, so the deal was, and I need to look up the dates on this, but when you called, it was either, I think it was, there were two events happening. I can't remember if you called right before or right after, but it really makes no difference for the story. The two events were birth of my second child and finalizing a book manuscript for a book that had been a great deal of work. And so just the level of exhaustion in the house at that point was off the wall crazy. So, I assume a lot of your listeners are probably old enough to have a couple of kids, and everyone knows it's like when they're little, that's when you're really, not only are there a lot of work, but you're losing a lot of sleep. And when you combine that with Kelly and I were both working jobs, like I was a cartoonist, and Kelly is a scientist, like a working, teaching classes scientist, not to mention research, of course. And then on top of that, we were raising babies and doing a research intensive book that had to be written in 18 months. And so like just absolutely like, like working on a lot of projects is fun until it's not fun. And we were well beyond not fun at that point. And I was just like, I can't do it. And I can't do it to my wife. And so no, and with great regret, no, because I really did want to do it. And then essentially just a couple things happened. Like I had, I talked to her with my wife, and she was, let me tee it up a little. So it was also like, I'd gotten interested recently in my own genealogy just as a sort of pastime. And I have a kind of just typical Eastern European Jewish genealogy on my father's side, which means, of course, like every genealogy in that camp, if you have anyone who was stayed behind in the late 30s, they're gone because they were murdered. And so it just, for me, that became a very, very sort of like developed a sort of compelling interest in the idea of immigration as more than just like making a couple extra bucks or what have you. It was very clear in my family tree, the people who immigrated thrived and the people who didn't, it was literally the opposite. And so it was just very motivating. And then I also, to tell you the truth, I was kind of pacing to the floor about it, and I talked to Kelly about it, and I think you had said there was some donor money you could get. And I was like, well, we'd get paid this much. And it's like, we're sitting here like, she's either about to have a baby. I can't remember if she's about to have a baby or is holding a baby. And she's like, I think getting some extra money wouldn't be the worst thing in the world right this second. And so I just ended up calling back and doing it. The other thing I should add is I had actually tried to find someone who I thought would do a good job. And not that I'm the greatest artist in the world, but I just thought, given the weird subject matter, I didn't know anyone else who would do a good job. Because maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but like one of the pages, for example, I'm really, really proud of in that book is the one where we did the population pyramids, which is kind of dumb because I think that anyone interested in demographics, like it's a very clear graph, but I think we styled it in a way that really naturally uses the comic format to make it clear to a non-statsy audience what's going on here. And so I felt like that was some of my value added here, like someone who can read graphs and understands math. And I didn't know anyone else who had this sort of like weird set of skills to do an econ nonfiction comic book. So that is why.
Okay. So when you signed on to our project, I deliberately didn't ask you how much you agreed with the content because I figured I had you and I didn't want to rock the boat. So since we're done, how much did you actually agree at the start and now?
Oh, I would say, I mean, so I had read your essay on immigration, so I kind of knew what the book was going to be. I mean, I can't remember too many offhand. There were places where I said, well, some version of, I think I would say this a little differently, but we didn't end up changing it. But by and large, I agree. And certainly with the open borders stuff, the part that I'll say it this way, that I thought would make friends of mine the most uncomfortable was stuff in the keyhole solution section. But even then, it's in the context of saying we'd rather have a different policy. I would say the one panel I would say I was least comfortable with, although we draw you as uncomfortable with it, is the one about is the one about a keyhole solution. How, like, I think France has done their burqa ban stuff, which part of it is just, in the U.S. that's just illegal, so you couldn't do it. Because it's very, very obviously freedom of expression. I would say that made me the most uncomfortable, being like, I don't even want to countenance this idea because it's a non-starter and it's such an ugly idea to me. It's like, burqa bans, I find it exceptionally ugly, not just because it's a limit of freedom of expression, but it's like no one's talking for a nun's habit ban, and it's like almost an identical article of clothing from the perspective of covering up. So it's just very, very clearly unambiguously targeting one group as a group, not because of like feminist reasons or something. So I mentioning it, I was a little uncomfortable with, but again, it's in the broader framework of we don't like this either. So that was probably as close as it gets. I mean, I'm in the tank, baby. I'm I'm all for it. And I knew basically what you were going to say in advance. So not too much change on my end.
Cool. So in the last chapter of Open Borders, I contrast the immigration as charity frame with the immigration as justice and abundance frame. Would you say that our collaboration moved you from the first frame to the second, or what?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was already in it. Like, I think you and I, kind of beyond what's in the book, share this sort of like view of immigration is also just kind of part of a beautiful, vibrant future. I mean, I know that's in the book to some extent, but like one thing we don't talk about in the book, because I assume because like how would you ever get this data, is there are probably like third, fourth, fifth order effects that you could not measure we will see. And so I in a way, I mean, you can't really argue for it because it's like trying to predict the future. But to me, that's almost the most exciting part, like the sort of the poets and musicians, but also the like Sergey Brin's, the Elon Musk's, these things that will come with immigration that we can't see. So I have a kind of for me, I want that vibrant stuff. Like, even I wouldn't put this in an argument, but even if it came at a cost, I would want that stuff. Even if it came with something like a net negative cost, which I don't believe it does, I would want that stuff. So no, I'm rather selfishly pro-immigration. I do think the strong moral case is the one for refugees and asylees and that sort of thing. But I'm in it for the cool stuff too.
All right, leads right into my next question, which is, if you could admit unlimited refugees from only one country, which country would you choose?
Yes, I thought about this, and I'd say I would actually say the obvious answer is India, because you're benefiting on both ends. So you have a lot of high-skilled people and the cool stuff they'll do, but there are a lot of desperately poor people in India. There are still malnourished children in India. There are still places, I think, getting electrified in India, or if not, it's changed in the last few years. So it's like, and also just from a boring perspective, I think India either has more people in China or is almost there and is clearly going to get past
definitely
China.
not quite there. I think they're about 20 years from now.
Yeah. So you're talking about a place with a load of young people, so it means it's kind of where the future is in terms of like just young, vibrant people. But you also have the high skilled people, and you also have the moral case of people who really need to be able to leave and send home money. So it just seems like a no-brainer. Like the obvious second guess would be China, but China is getting to where it's less of a moral thing. Well, unless you're talking about people fleeing, political oppression, which may get worse in the future, but it's hard to predict. So I would say India.
So you run the Bad Ad Hoc Hypothesis Festival. What is your favorite bad ad hoc hypothesis that blames immigrants for something?
That blames immigrants. I don't know if I
count... like it would be in the running to win the prize if it were done at the festival.
Let me give you the one. This would not be in the running to win the prize because it's like super racist. But I thought, I was familiar with all the various Jewish conspiracy theories, but I had not come across until we did immigration it's a secret Jewish plot to bring people to quote unquote white countries to like unwhite them, and I didn't know, like, it's like the Jews are playing the long game, so that's why they want more immigrants. They've come, I can't think of any other reason. And so but they have this evidence that it's like, well, did you know there was this prominent Jewish person who was pro-immigrant? And you're like, it's really, you're like, well, he was pro-immigrant because his family was being murdered in the so it's in a way like a bad ad hoc Bafest hypothesis. There's all this quote unquote evidence that gets brought to bear, but it's not quite. I mean, I took this to a depressing place, and I probably shouldn't have, but maybe that if we'd allow it, which we wouldn't.
All right, so to make sure we don't end in a depressing place, let me now move on to graphic novels and other super fun stuff.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to rip off Tyler Cowen and give you some overrated or underrated in graphic novels. So, manga, overrated or underrated?
Oh God, you're gonna make people angry. I mean, with the caveat that I am not an aficionado of manga. I've read a decent amount, but not a lot. I would say it kind of has to be overrated, although it's quite good. But it's like it's got a cult, I assume, at least that was true when I was a teenager, and I assume it persists. Everyone has had this experience. Everyone who's not in the tank for manga has had this experience of someone being like, "Oh, this 8,000 part series is so good," and then you read like 4 of them, you're like, I not only is it not good, but I don't even know what's going on. And they're like, well, you need to read episodes 1 through 8 billion, and then you'll get it and you'll love it. And I'm like, maybe I'll love it because I've just invested so much time. I can't convince myself that I don't love it because it would be too depressing. Like, I've had this brief, like with my kids' Pokemon manga, I will read anything. I will read a phone book before reading Pokemon manga. I just cannot stand it. And this is where I'm really making people angry, but like, it's just the way I describe it is like reading a phone book. To me, I shouldn't say phone book as an example, but it's like 200 pages of stats about Pokemon, supposedly in the form of a story, but everyone's just saying stats about Pokemon for 200 pages. And like there'll be an interaction that's like, aha, I see you have level 3 of this magic stone, which gives your Pokemon this evolution, and the other person will be like, aha, but I went to this island where you get this slight variation on evolution, and you're like, okay, but there's no characters here. There's just people yelling numbers at each other. So I just I love like Mizuki. He's great and people like him. I like the literary stuff, but most manga is not that. So I'll go with overrated.
All right, how about autobiographical comics?
Oh, I love that.
Underrated.
I'll just say underrated. I don't know how people rate them. Probably I would still say underrated because I have a deep abiding soft spot for memoirs. And comic memoirs are sort of exceptionally personal because you can draw your feelings, and you can draw like, or even put in like photographs and stuff, and it's just like one thing comics handle really well is emotion in a way perhaps no other medium handles quite as well. And so I do like. Even the light stuff like Guy Delisle's travelogues are just like treasure them.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
Absolutely treasure them. Yeah, absolutely wonderful.
All right, zombie graphic novels, overrated or underrated?
All right. Gosh, so I'm not into the zombie thing. Period. So like. I was telling Kelly, so Kelly has watched a lot of zombie movies. She watched a lot because she did a talk about like she studies parasites, and zombies are often like, there's a parallel, there's a parasite explanation. And so she watched a lot for this talk. And so I had this theory. I was like, Kelly, I have this theory of the genre of zombie. It has nothing to do with the undead or being scary. It has to do with how there are lots of regular people who have this fantasy that if something, by some means, they were suddenly empowered, they would be great. And I was like, that's my theory of zombie movies. Every zombie movie works like this. There's some schlub or some regular guy who's well-meaning, but their life at like age 30 has just not gone the way they wanted. And then suddenly there's an apocalypse, and it turns out they're incredibly resourceful, and they were meant for leadership, but it never came up in their lives. And also, therefore, some attractive partner is interested in them, and they can have a cool knife and a gun, which they're mysteriously good at. And I think, especially among people like in their midlife crisis, like from like age 27 to 45, that's really compelling, because like, so there's a lot of theory on like why people are unhappy at like age 40, and part of it is I think you can't possibly you as a kid you overestimate how good it's going to be 40, because you wake up one day and you're not an NFL quarterback, Nobel Prize winner, famous pop singer, and everything else you intended to be. Your life is actually objectively maybe quite good, but you're not those things. And a zombie movie is a setting where you basically get that. You get to save the world, even though you did nothing to earn it. And so she watched a lot of zombie movies with this premise in mind. And among American movies, I think it was like maybe 40% fit under that rubric. So for me, that's a very non-compelling narrative. It's kind of boring. It's just another variation on power fantasy. So therefore, overrated because I'm getting too long-winded.
All right, so super short answers. So
yes.
Who's your favorite DC superhero and who is your favorite Marvel superhero?
Okay, don't care for DC superheroes, so I don't know, Batman. Marvel, God, I'm just not a superhero guy. You know this about me. So I don't particularly like superheroes, so I'm just gonna say like Batman and I don't know, Spider-Man or something. Does DC?
All right. So we're almost running out of time.
Yeah.
So
yes.
All right, who's your favorite RR? JRR or GRR?
JRR, and I will add JRR, the essayist, more than the novelist.
All right, cool. So what's the very best way to end a work of fiction? Happy, sad, or bittersweet?
Ambiguously sad, or if you will, Russian.
All right. So tell us about your new Beowulf project. What's so great about Beowulf?
Let me keep this succinct. Beowulf is, and we owe this understanding to Tolkien. It was for a long time thought of as just kind of like a weird old monster tale. It is basically a poem about death and time, but which is told very beautifully in this alliterative sort of pounding Anglo-Saxon verse, and is told as a sort of monster fighting story. It's as if you read Conan the Barbarian, but it was actually about mortality. And it's just wonderful that way. And the words are themselves beautiful. I recommend the Hal Chickering Jr.'s translation. Haney's is the famous one, and Tolkien did a lovely one too. It's just great. And so I'm writing, and I shouldn't say any more than that I'm writing an adaptation of it. That's a very deep adaptation that's meant to be like a little funny and weird, but kind of written in the sort of flow of Anglo-Saxon verse. And I'm just loving the hell out of it. I'm doing a lot of research and enjoying it.
All right, really looking forward to that. All right, what's the funniest book or movie or show or YouTube video that hardly anyone knows about?
Yeah, I saw this question earlier when you posted to me. I thought about it, and I guess the one I'd say there's a book that was written in Czech. I don't read Czech, but it's translated to English. It's called The Good Soldier Schweik. I'm probably mispronouncing Schweik. But it's just a comedy novel from the early 20th century about the soldier who's in the army and he just has sort of these wacky adventures. It's just absolutely laugh out loud hilarious, and seldom read by people in English. I understand everyone in Czech Republic knows it, but we don't. So the good soldier Schweik, I'm going to recommend.
All right, last question, and everyone should listen to your answer very carefully. You once told me not sucking is my retirement plan. Could you give details? What's the best way for people who don't currently suck to avoid lapsing into suckitude?
So let me just say, in case my parents listen to this, my actual retirement plan is having retirement money. But I've like Vanguard index funds. I have the most boring retirement plan possible. But it's the obvious and boring plan. But my not sucking plan is twofold. One, watch what the kids are doing. Don't hate on them. They're always coming up with new stuff you haven't heard of, so pay attention. They're often better than you. Why shouldn't they be? It's not as if like there's a linear regression through time to the best writers. Watch what young people are doing, and steal from them. It's okay to steal from the young. They have youth. We need their stuff. And two, read a lot. Like I said earlier, you don't want to be boring. Read a lot, learn a lot, or do a lot, but do something to disambiguate yourself from everybody else, or you really just don't have a shot in the world. That's my don't lapse into suckitude approach. Steal from the young, steal from the old.
All right, awesome. So now you got exactly half an hour to interview me.
Yeah, so let's do it.
All right, so let's do it.
Yeah, let's launch in. So I roughly duplicated your format. So here goes. So I want to talk about some backstory questions. So I was walking with Scott Aronson, and we were saying, like, why is Bryan Caplan so happy? And we both feel frazzled all the time. And he has as many kids as we have put together. What's going on? And the theory we came to is that we believe you have been actively, as an economist, optimizing your life since, like, the age of -9 months. So how accurate is that? And if that's not accurate, what's your secret?
Right. So definitely wasn't starting at -9 months. So I had so many dysfunctional views and behaviors in high school. I was just looking back, I kind of amazed I had any friends at all. I was just such a loudmouth jerk to so many people, and it took me many years to get past that. I think that I have. So I do like like so, and I didn't I didn't start even studying economics till I was 17, but then I think it took me about 10 years before I really started applying it. I mean, I even changed my own my own oil when I was a PhD student. If one of my friends had just seen me and mocked me and just said, you're working for 3 hours for $10, you're earning minimum wage doing something you hate, why are you doing that? I would have stopped, but I wasn't properly integrating the insights into my life until quite a bit later. But yeah, I would say that beginning around 30, I started paying a lot more attention to what I was doing that was not making me happy, or things that just seemed like I could do better, and just thinking about ways that I can improve on things. And also, so becoming a parent, then you have this big time crunch from being a parent. So I started thinking more about things that actually paid and were worthwhile, and other things that didn't seem like they made a lot of sense to me. And I do actually consciously try to make things better on at least an hourly basis. So, like when I'm doing something and it doesn't, and I'm feeling like it's not very good, I said, well, like, what could I do to make it better, right? And especially since I do have this super flexible job as a professor, I have a lot more opportunity to tweak things that I don't like. But I am also just trying to pay attention to ways that I can improve and just be mindful of that. And then, for my kids, I mean, so I've got 4 kids, but like as a parent, a lot of what I think my job is just having fun with them. So I mean, I try to entertain them. When I was asking you if you like how hard you try to be funny, I actually do try to be funny. So at dinner, I am thinking like, what can I tell these kids that would be funny? Right? They're here. They're doing what they're supposed to do. So I should go and make this a good experience for them. And I do actually try to amuse them. And like if I notice those jokes don't work, they aren't funny to the kids. All right, well, I don't know what would make them laugh.
Yeah, rotate something new. That's interesting.
So there is a lot of that going on in my life, and like. I mean, I will say that there's a lot of times where I'm really laughing, but something's still bothering me. So I mean, once I was on a plane, I was actually feeling really bad for unrelated reasons, but I was watching a show and cracking up, and there was someone else on the plane who said, "Why you seem so happy?" I'm like, I guess I was laughing a lot, but in a sense, I felt pretty unhappy during this plane trip. But I can be happy and unhappy at the same time in some sense.
That's like a sad clown situation. That's That actually relates to a question I wanted to ask to follow up, which is sort of like the comparing you to other academics. I would say every academic I know is stressed constantly, and you don't seem to have that as much. And I don't know, maybe you're just further along in your career than other academics I know, but that wouldn't explain everything. So what I wonder is, do you think I often see academics who I feel like maybe are not managing stuff the way they should as academics, like they're overvaluing stuff that other people could do, or what have you. Do you see that same sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was quite stressed out during my first few years because I was having trouble publishing at first, and I was really nervous about what's going to happen if the one career that I prepared myself for all this time, I wind up botching. But yeah, once I got tenure, my job stress really went down to pretty much nothing. And you're right, there are a lot of academics, even ones who have tenure, who are very stressed about what's going on. And I'm trying to figure out what their problem is. I just think they're out of their minds. Right? You have this dream job for life. You cannot be fired. You can do whatever you want and call that work. So why are you still unhappy? And there's a lot of self-imposed misery where people say, I have to do this, and who says you have to do it? You don't really have to do that. I've talked to people who retire in their 60s from academia, and I was like, why the hell would you retire? You can just keep receiving full pay to do whatever you want. It doesn't make any sense. And people said, oh, there's all this committee work. It's like, you don't have to do committee work if you don't want to. Just say no.
I do wonder about that. Well, we could go off on this, but yeah, I think there's something true to. I was thinking that it's a bummer you'll never write the book that goes through all this stuff because it's not a Bryan Caplan book. But I would love to read.
I have actually been thinking of doing a self-help book. So, I'm not quite sure what it would be. I've got a few different ideas. I mean, in a way, I feel like if I could just get over the need to actually to do research on the book and just say, look, this is a book based on no research. It's just the way things seem to me. Take it or leave it. That book would take me about 1/5 the time of a normal book.
Right.
And
Right,
so
I mean, there's
it's
even
appealing in that way.
there's stuff where I imagine the research would be at your fingertips. Like, and, I think you told me once, like being gracious is very highly associated with happiness, so I became more gracious or something like that. So there's stuff like that where the research, I'm sure But I would love to read that book, especially like the Bryan Caplan approach to parenting would be fun too. Although,
well, that one I did write. That one I did write. Although
that's true.
It wasn't so there's a little bit of autobiography in it, but not so much. And...
Yeah, no, I mean the child rearing in particular, like how you handle punishment, like theory of punishment. I'd be very interested in.
I mentioned that in the book. There is research on just small but very reliable punishments are highly effective ways of improving kids' behavior in the short term, and I'm a big believer in that. So I virtually never lose my temper with any kid. But if I said, look, if you don't go and do this, you're going to lose your computer time for this evening, and they don't do it, and I say, well, I'm not angry, but you've lost your computer time for this evening. That's the system.
That's my approach. But the way I heard it that I like best was someone once said, you can say yes to anything, you can say no to anything, but you can't say no, yes. And that's been my guiding philosophy. Let me switch topics here a little bit. So I've talked about a lot about you, so let me do the other stuff. Oh, interesting. So I was talking to a friend who's a reporter actually, and he's like into politics, and he was asking me about libertarians, and I was saying my impression is there are sort of like two tracks. There are people who are more economisty, data, who just strongly believe in markets and freedom and that sort of thing. And then there's another track that's this kind of like ideological, Ayn Randy, man was born to not be shackled track. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of there's these two different factions that are in some ways very different. And I know you've described yourself as not an Austrian, and I think not an objectivist, but still a libertarian. So could you describe sort of the difference and why you are not those things?
Right. So what you're saying definitely seems true if you take a quick look, although I know so many libertarians who talk to so many. I would say that it's very hard to find a libertarian economist who actually only cares about the money. Right. Gotcha. So, there's just way too many issues where they don't know much about where they're still libertarian on it. So say, look, it can't be that you've read the research. You haven't read the research. You're just that can't be the right answer. And on the other hand, I think it's even harder to find a Randian individualist who doesn't care about economics. Right. So in terms of meeting someone who's a philosophical libertarian who just doesn't know Econ 1, that almost never happens. They may know only their distorted version of Econ 1, but they still know Econ 1. So I think that the real story is that people actually are not really, they don't believe the thing they say for just the reason they say. There's actually a combination of reasons which all interact together in a complicated way. So I think that's the real story. Right. So there are every now and then you'll meet a person who just says, look, I just don't care about a bunch of arguments at all. But, even then when you push them, you usually find that they do care. And well, if you don't care about the arguments, how can you spend a third of your time making arguments that you don't care about? And rarely do they say, oh, well, it's because I'm trying to convince other people that don't agree with me. It's more along the lines of it's just hard to say it doesn't matter if an asteroid destroys the world because you weren't willing to tax someone for 10 cents. So there's that kind of thing. Yeah.
I have a related question along those lines, which I think you and I have talked about once or twice. But so you and I both love Philip Tetlock.
Oh yeah.
And I would even say you and I are both sort of constitutionally Tetlockian, love the sort of contrarian people who say they know what they're talking about don't actually know what you're talking about when you make them state what they think they know. I get a visceral enjoyment out of that, and I think you do too. Mm-hmm. But so Tetlock famously has this framework of the fox and the hedgehog. Like the hedgehog knows one thing, the fox knows many things. And at least naively, I think most people would think of libertarianism as embodying a hedgehog philosophy. Mm-hmm. And yet you're a Tetlockian. So how do you square that circle if you need to?
Yeah, I think the honest answer is psychologically, I'm a hedgehog all the way. That's what's emotionally appealing to me. But I just know too much research about hedgehogs screwing up. And I'm a big student of history. I just know hedgehogs get things really wrong, really, really badly. So someone like, Tetlock really was an inspiration to me to step up my game and say, yeah, well, this is what the big picture that I want to believe, but that doesn't make it true, does it? Of course it doesn't make it true. So I was also influenced by Robin Hanson before Tetlock, where Robin was really into betting, and that's played a big role in my life. But a lot of this to me is saying, all right, so what is it that you would actually need to do in order to be justified in your big picture? And it comes down to breaking the big picture up into a lot of small pictures and then trying to see whether you actually really have knowledge. And like, how do you know whether you really have knowledge? Well, one good test is being able to bet other people on it, right? And of course, one bet could just be luck, but if you have a long series of bets where you have high accuracy, that's showing that your big picture is justified by virtue of a whole bunch of small pictures all coming through for you, or at least almost all of them coming through. I'll say that from the very earliest age, I've had a severe character flaw, which is just extreme megalomania, and I'm very aware of it. And I know megalomaniacs are crazy and do terrible things, and so I don't want to use my personality as an excuse for being bad. And the work of people like Tetlock is a lot of the way that I check myself. So in terms of my feelings, they're some of the worst hedgehog feelings that I know of. But I think that I have done a good job of stepping back and just humbling myself. And it's painful for me in that for example, the way that I read criticism is it burns me too much to read it as it comes in. So normally what I'll do is I'll make a stack of it and I'll just say, okay, I'm going to get in a frame of mind where I am willing to be criticized. I'm not going to argue with the criticism. I'm just going to absorb it. And then I'll take one heavy dose of criticism all at the one time. Which I think it's useful because it also lets you see whether there's patterns to the criticism. But it's just easier for me to stomach because I do feel like I need to psychologically prepare myself to be humbled and to be criticized and to listen, right? Because it's not what's in my heart.
Right. Yeah, that's smart. I have a follow-up question that I wanted to ask, which is, let me lay out Zach Weinersmith's theory of why Bryan always wins bets, except for the one. So I have a unified theory, which is Bryan Caplan always bets on the baseline, on the regression to the mean. And so what you do is you, like a circling vulture, wait for someone to say, this is the new normal. And then you swoop in.
Yes.
And you say, I will bet you this is not the new normal. And so you which has produced an impressive streak. But the one bet you've lost is, or will almost certainly lose. Well, I guess we could argue you probably should have lost your Brexit bet. But let's set that aside. The one bet you probably lose is the one against Yoram Bowman about climate change. And so my view of it is that climate change is real and it's an actual systemic long-term change. I mean, maybe there'll be a regression to the mean over a couple hundred years, but it's not there. And so my grand theory then is that your betting style is generally the best way to go, but might miss big things. Right. So am I right or wrong?
On that warming bet, if I did the full big picture, then I wouldn't have made the bet. The reason is because if you look at, if you just go back to all the data we have, then the warming trend's totally clear. But there had been a 15-year pause in warming, and and then Bauman was willing to give me very good odds. So I was thinking, look, probably will return to trend, but he gave me 3-1 odds that we would have another 15-year pause. And if you look at the record, there have been long pauses. So
that's interesting. It's like the one time you bet against regression to the mean and you got burned.
Yeah, it's because you gave me good odds. I wouldn't have done it without the odds. Now I will say my betting record, on that one, it'll stay perfect for 10 years, and so I do like to say, look, that one's the jury's still out. I'll probably lose. On the Brexit one, I won by a month. So, I mean, I wouldn't say so much that I deserve to lose as it deserved to be a draw or something like that. That would be fair. Although, if you go and read my write-up on it, the reason why I offered that bet was that my main opponent, Mark Stein, was predicting the imminent collapse of the EU. Back over 12 years ago, and he even said, ever since 9/11, I've been predicting the imminent collapse. And I think 19 years of predicting imminent collapse and nothing, and then finally at the end, one country leaves. That I don't claim as remotely a victory. So on our bet was close because I deliberately made the terms really sweet to get him on board. So in terms of what he said, he was light years away. But in terms of the actual bet, then it was really
Right.
close. I still squeaked by, so I have to
Right.
say, be happy about that.
Do we have time to go through? I was going to go through your books, or should we skip to the our stuff together? Or do we
So
have
yeah,
time?
probably skipped our stuff.
Okay. Let's skip to talk about our stuff together. So I think I get way more credit than I deserve for this book because you actually gave me. I mean, I did change some layouts and I split some pages and this and that, but mostly you gave me pretty close to final layouts, which is a lot more than most writers do for comics. So I guess the question I had, like, these were well thought out layouts, like, so, but you didn't come to comics until late in life, is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, I pretty much never read them when I was a kid.
Yeah, but you know the format really well. We were laughing at this. Like, I kept recommending you books, and you'd be like, "Oh, I read it," or "It's on my wall." Um, so wait,
Yeah.
you like how'd you get into it, and what sort of kept you in?
Right. So I would say, like, once I, well, let's see. I mean, just to back up. So, like, like a very good friend of mine gave me Watchmen for my birthday when I was, think, 20
Uh,
or 21. And so that got me into the idea that there were some cool graphic novels. Then I read V for Vendetta when I was in graduate school. But since libraries usually don't really carry much in the way of graphic novels, it was a hobby that I didn't really pursue until I actually had a job and was making money. And then I was worried about tenure. But then finally around 2000, that's when I felt secure in tenure and I had this money and I was looking around for new hobbies. And so I started going and getting some more. And then I got some books of 50 best graphic novels ever, and I ordered almost all those. 50 best manga, ordered almost all those. And then I came across Scott McCloud's Making Comics and Understanding Comics. And that's what started giving me the idea of, wouldn't it be really fun to do this? And he has so much useful practical advice on panel layout and the right level of zoom and the right shape of the panels and that kind of thing, and very subtle things like how do you create the feeling of a slow or quick passage of time. And there are tricks that are known in the biz to do that. So that's what got me thinking about it. And then I think it was in 2006, I just happened to get this free software. Really, like, I got a review copy, which is my comic book creator, and I
okay.
just started playing around with that, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I just found it very relaxing, and it was just a way where I could be creative in a format that was totally different from what I was used to as an academic. So I wound up eventually writing a fully storyboarded graphic novel then called Amore Infernale. So that was my first try, and I mean, I shared that with people, but never got drawn. But it did give me the idea. Okay, so that was pretty fun to do. I mean, actually, it was super fun. I was just loving it, and the software really helped in terms of just giving you different ideas for you're basically a menu of different panel arrangements, right? So someone who knew the software could look at our book and say, hey, all the panel arrangements are on the original 100 options for what a page can look like in this book. Not quite. I did fiddle with it more in order to retrofit it for some other possibilities,
Yeah.
but there was that, and then like for this book, came down to that I just wanted to go and take advantage of the fact that you really can that a picture really is worth 1,000 words, and you can go and just convey a lot more information in a short amount of time using the comics format. Seeing people like Larry Gonick and his Cartoon History of the Universe and realizing, wow, just because it's a comic doesn't mean it has to be at a low intellectual level, doesn't mean that it isn't carefully fact checked. And it's a way of just squeezing a lot more information in a much more memorable way into a short amount of time for the reader. And I really like that idea. And since immigration was the topic that I was most passionate about, and where I just thought there's a lot of great research that hardly anyone knows about because it's just in journals. And if I could go and distill it in this format, I could get a lot of people to learn about it and read it and put it in context. Because there's a lot of immigration research where if you only read the paper, almost everyone would say, well, who cares? Who cares whether the best predictor of language acquisition is years of study or age when you began learning the language? But when you put it as part of a case for immigration liberalization, then that one seemingly boring paper becomes interesting.
Yeah. Do we have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah, sure. So maybe
Okay,
like
great.
10 minutes, I can go right up to the line.
Okay, great. So let me see what I want to do with the questions I have left. Okay, so I know you and I have talked this over in a previous podcast that didn't record properly, and I think it inspired an essay. So I'm just going to tee it up real quick. So the question you and I often get from people who are trolling on the internet is, open borders for Israel. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the implication being something like, I'm on to you people. You want immigrants to America, but you want to keep the Jewish bloodline pure or something like that. That's the accusation. So I would the two questions I have are, one, you answer that question honestly, open borders for Israel. But then the second question, the sort of more sophisticated version, would be like, should countries, so the U.S. is not a blood and soil country. We're a country based on an idea. And as opposed to, say, Japan, which is not just a place, but it's like a group of people by blood, by genes, by however you want to say it. And there are many countries that way. That used to be what a country was. And so the first question is that uglier question, open borders for Israel. Second question, like, we say there's a moral obligation, a moral assumption in favor of free movement. Is that lessened at all by being a blood and soil country, or a historically like blood and soil country, like a Scandinavian country or Japan or what have you?
Right. So, open borders for Israel. I've been waiting for a sincere person to ask me this, and you're the first one.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So here's the key thing, right? If you actually read anything I've said about it, I've never been absolutist, at least not since I've been 30, and so I've never said you should have open borders under absolutely any circumstances whatsoever. Instead, I say that it is a moral presumption, and we should be open to the possibility that it's actually a bad idea. But even then, however, if there's restrictions that are justified, you should still think about the cheapest and most humane way of restricting immigration, or that avoids the problem. So for the case of Israel, I absolutely would favor open borders, except for one thing, which is I think it would cause civil war. Right. So I think that if Israel actually opened borders, it is very likely, like over 50% chance, that they would have a terrible civil war within 10 years. Right. So that is, to my mind, the reason why it would not be a good idea for Israel to have full open borders. However, that doesn't mean that Israel should not have much more open borders. So before the Intifada, it was totally normal for Palestinians to go and work in Israel, and I think that was great, and Israel should bring that back. So there's no reason to not let in all of the people that would not be likely to provoke civil war. So non-Muslim Africans, Latin Americans, Asians, like all of those, I think would be very unlikely to be leading any kind of civil war, except for for Muslim Asians, where I would be a little bit worried. I like to say, I am not a supporter of Israel. I'm not a supporter of any government. Every government does terrible things. Israel does a lot of terrible things. But in terms of just keeping it as a ethnic enclave or something like that, I've got no sympathy for that. So that that's what I would say for open borders for Israel. Like if it won't cause civil war, then I'm all for it. If it would, then per what I've been saying many times, then we shouldn't be fully open border, but Israel could still do a lot more, and without having a noticeable risk of civil war. In terms of sort of this dispensation for blood and soil countries, what I say for there is even the biggest blood and soil countries, a bunch of people that would like to go and employ immigrants, that would like to go and rent to immigrants, and I'd say that we should think about their rights. So it's not the case that every person in Japan wants to keep Japan the way that it is. There are plenty of people that would love to go and hire immigrants, plenty of people that would love to go and rent to them. And so I say that we should think about the rights of those people. And even if they're a minority, so they probably are a minority still, minority rights are really important. So, and again, if it were actually a full intentional community, right, where a group of people all go and they buy the land and there's unanimous consent, then it's a different matter. But, the harsh reality, no country is founded on unanimous consent. Constitutions that purport to be social contracts, it's a fiction, right? It's not true that everyone in the United States consented or signed this contract, right? And you can't sign, for any normal contract, you can't sign it by majority rule. You can't go to two people and say, hey, let's go and start a business together, and one of them says great, and then you tell the third person, okay, now you have to work with us on the business. So I'd say that when people think of countries as clubs, I just say, look, it's not a club. It's nothing like a club. A club, they can't make people join that didn't want to join, and they can't say, if you don't follow our rules, you have to leave your house, right?
Right.
That is what the countries say.
And I think I would add to that, and maybe this is like American culture or something, but like one of the unappreciated values of immigration, I suspect, is that it helps put to bed old feuds between groups.
Hmm.
Because it's like you imagine you have Israel, which obviously has an ongoing feud between at least two groups. If you suddenly brought in 5 million Chinese people into Israel, well, they don't have a side in this. They're there for the
Yeah.
work. Um,
Yeah, I think that makes great sense. Even in this old blog post pointing out that in the United States, Israelis and Palestinians don't fight each other. Very
right.
often they live within comfortable driving distance, but you almost never hear about some Palestinian youths drive into a Jewish area of New York to cause some trouble, right?
Right.
And a lot of it is just that both groups have been deprived of any hope of winning, and so they
Right.
give
Yeah.
up.
Exactly.
Then there's peace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And it's one of the things. I don't think we talk about that sort of stuff in the book, but it's something I really love about immigration is that you can, comparably, like there are all these old feuds. Like there's still plenty of Irish people who don't like the English living in Ireland because of the Troubles. If they come here, they might still harbor some of those feelings, but their kids will think it's silly, and they certainly won't act on it. And it's just, I don't know there's something psychologically about moving to a new place. But yeah, so a country like Israel, it seems to me, could benefit greatly from people who basically don't care about who has rights to the Temple Mount. That's probably a way too controversial opinion, but there it is. So since we just have like 3 minutes, let me go through some quick answer stuff real quick. I wanted to do it like, would you take this deal on immigration? So deal number one, you can have the number of normal immigrants that we take now, but you can take unlimited refugees. Would you take that deal?
Let's see. So unlimited refugees, and then who decides whether someone counts? Is it it's regular American courts or?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, then I wouldn't take the deal because I think that American courts would very quickly come up with a whole bunch of rules that say that that you're not really a refugee. I mean, in turn, so if it were actually if there was some neutral body that would just classify the people who cannot safely live in their area and they're refugees, then I would take the deal because that would be an enormous number of people. But by the usual way that we actually assess refugee status, then I think it just wouldn't be that many people.
All right, option two, you can have open borders but no citizenship for either the immigrants or their kids. For 2 generations, no citizenship.
Yeah, that's a great deal. Yeah, I would take that in a heartbeat. I mean, like the actual value that people get out of citizenship, it's the kind of thing people claim it's life and death, but actually I think that actions speak louder than words. People would be really happy to take that deal, and again for their kids, like let's say you don't have to grow up in Haiti, but yeah, you can't vote, so there is that. So yeah, I'd say that's a great deal.
How about open borders, but only at the exclusion of everyone else, only highly skilled individuals, and say there's a cap of like 2 million.
Right. So open borders, but only high skilled and a cap of 2 million. Well, it's still a lot more than we've got, and especially considering all of the good that they can do with the remittances, then yeah, I think so. Well, let's see. Actually, hold on. Now, 2 million is actually really close to what we have right now. Now that I think about it, yeah, because it's about 2/3% of the population is roughly what we're getting. So in that case, probably no. You got to give me more.
Gotta give you more. All right, those are my cases. I'm just going to do a quick overrated, underrated with you, and then I'll let you go. I got 4. Overrated, underrated. Academia.
Overrated. Yes, I mean it's really fun for us professors, but in terms of the social value that we contribute, it's really low. Except of course for me and my friends who are changing the world every day. But
totally different. Yeah. Okay. Overrated, underrated. Alcohol.
Yeah. Overrated. So yeah, I mean I don't drink at all myself, and I would just say like you can be a super happy person without alcohol, and there's just there's enough people that seem like they've messed up their lives with it that if someone were saying I'm thinking of trying it is a good idea, I mean I would probably say well do you have any family history of alcoholism? If not, then probably you're okay, but still can't you be don't you have a bunch of other ways of being happy? So I would go with alcohol overrated.
All right, overrated, underrated. Writing books.
So among economists, definitely underrated. So economists, we are a very strong journal article culture, and there is an idea that books aren't very important. And when I say, look, a book is an opportunity to go and say things the way that you want to say them, to address bigger questions that you're not allowed to deal with in just a journal article. In terms of the general population, I would say, since most books are bad, writing books is overrated. Right? If you just go to a library and pick random ones off the shelf, you do have to say like, why was this book done? And of course, it's ego, right? Like everybody thinks they've got a lot of great stuff to say, and I would just say when you really look at it, most people don't have much that's so great to say. In terms of and then in terms of just the enjoyment, yeah, I'd say that, like a few people that aren't very good still get a lot of pleasure out of it, and so good for them. But a lot of other people like do it, and it's a very frustrating and embittering experience for them. So, yeah, so probably overrated.
All right, I let's leave it there since it's time for you to go. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and
Yeah. This is great. And saying, like my one regret with finishing the book is that I'm not talking to you nearly as much, Zach.
I know. Well, Caplan is around the corner, so.
Yep, and one day I hope to do another one, Zach. So.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Before our time on this earth is done,
yes.
Like cue suitable Beowulf quote.
Yeah. I was just going over. Deor the poet says, "That's off fiorde this squa meg," which means that passed over and this may too. Gosh, is that relevant? I don't know. Anyway, yes, if the time horizon is wide enough, that is an absolute possibility.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm mired in. I literally had a book avalanche that almost hurt me yesterday for a new project. So that's where I am right now.
Okay.
But
right,
anyway,
awesome.
I should let you go. But it's always a pleasure, and let's get together soon.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
All right. Have a good lunch.
All right. Great pleasure. Thanks a lot, Zach. Bye.
Yeah.